All right. Hello and welcome back, business writing folks. Um, now that we have an idea of what reflection is, at least for our purposes here, I want to talk a little bit about the format. Again, since this is a business writing class, the vehicle or the method that you're going to deliver this reflection is through a presentation. And presentations are probably, and it's probably obvious, kind of part and parcel to a lot of business and academics. And I will say that you'll learn more about presentations in Business Writing 215. I don't teach that class, but I do know that in talking to the instructor that a big focus is on that as it's part of public speaking. So let's delve into it. So I think some of you are likely to have done presentations before in the past for a class, for work, whatnot. And some of you have sat through a lot of these presentations, like this video lecture that you're sitting through right now. So it's familiar territory. And I think that although it's familiar, much like writing an email, it's easy to do something frequently and not do it particularly well. So we're going to call attention to kind of the process of making a presentation as a closing point for this quarter. And just another good way to practice another communication skill. So before we go into what makes a good presentation, let's start with what makes a bad presentation. This is kind of a way that my brain works. Before I want to know, like, okay, a good paper or a good presentation. Well, okay, before I can understand what a good one is, I want to know what a bad one is. So I would encourage you to pause and think about it for a second. Hopefully the presentations in this class are not the worst you've ever seen, but I've come a long way in my time with presentations. Pre-pandemic, about 6 years ago, I had a student who said my presentations were almost as bad as FEMA presentations, and I've changed a lot since then. But just think about what in your mind would make a bad presentation, a bad PowerPoint presentation. And then when you're ready, you can unpause and move on. So I would say my list is kind of this. This is the first 7 things that popped into my head. No particular order, really, just the way that they occurred to me. Dull or monotone speaker, unpracticed or unpolished speaker, a lack of substance, confusing slides, slides with too much text, slides with too many pictures, slides with flashy transition. And as I was sort of looking at this list, I realized that I had divided it rather organically into the speaker themselves and the slides. And I've seen really dynamic, really good speakers use terrible slides, and usually their ability to speak well covers for the bad slides. I've never quite seen the opposite work, where it's a kind of a dull or monotone speaker with really fantastic slides. It just doesn't kind of translate the opposite direction. But, again, I've seen brilliant people present interesting ideas in incredibly boring ways, right? So again, much like a cover letter, email, what have you, it all comes down to audience. So now that we kind of maybe have some agreement, maybe you had some other things on your list that would make a bad presentation, let's think about what makes a good presentation. So chances are, if we were to unpack it, it would be kind of the opposite things on the list. Well practiced, simple slides, easy to follow, right? And I would be inclined to agree with you on that. So let's kind of continue forward. And the main thing is to remember that a presentation is to convey information, right? They are generally a way of one-way communication, like a cover letter or a resume, but they're also persuasive. Now, I say one way because right now I'm recording this video lecture, but it's one way. I don't see you. I don't see a reaction. You can't ask me questions in real time, or I can't read your, any of the body language and things like that. So when it comes to presentations, we have to be thinking about our audience ahead of time to plan. Now, the other thing about presentations is that they allow us to have a sort of a multimodal approach to communication. What I mean is we have the spoken word, we have the written word, and then we have images, all of which should work together, right? There's a reason that we have a presentation. Now, in a business setting, it might be because we have charts or graphs or other things. And I'll, in a bit here, go into kind of the reason that I do things the way I do them when it comes to presentations. Okay, so I want to sort of segue here and get into some specifics, but I do tend to keep my presentations pretty minimalistic. I don't try and do too much with them, but one thing that you've probably noticed is that I like images and memes like this primarily because of my audience, students, right? Adds a little bit of levity into things, breaks things up a little bit. And not only does it lighten the tone, but it really does give a nice visual cue for me and for my audience, right? For example, this one for my presentation today, I'll be reading the PowerPoint slides word for word. It's funny, but it's also a reminder not to have slides where you're just reading everything off of them. Okay, so my suggestions, much like any piece of communication, it's about the basics, right? What's the purpose? What do you want to accomplish? In this case, explaining your experience in business writing. 115. Identify the audience. Who are you presenting to? In this case, it's very simple because it's me. What are the major elements that I need to, or you need to include in your presentation? And how much time do you have? And I don't mean time to prepare, although that's definitely a factor. I mean, what's your time frame? Is it 5 to 10 minutes as we have here? Or is it 30 minutes? Again, it varies widely for me. I have classes like this that are online where I try and keep my presentations to 10 to 15 minutes. But I also have in-person classes that go for 2 hours. Now, I'm not talking the whole time. There are other components in there. But, again, we have to think about what's the time, what's the attention span of my audience. So now that we've kind of thought about what reflection is and a little bit about what goes into a presentation, and there's more in the assignment description about the specific prompt, right? The questions I want you to ask. I want to talk a little bit about creating slides to maximize effect. Again, it's not just a speech, it is a speech accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation or a script accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to look at a couple slides and you can just very visually, which one do you like? Do you like any of them? So, if we look at the one on the left, it's the contrast is really weird. COM protocol to be defined by QR, supply of XDE 215s being delayed. I mean, maybe that works for some people as far as the information, but the way it's being presented is really hard to look at. It looks like a web page from the late 1990s. On the top right, hopefully you identify 2 or 3 problems there. One is it looks like we just have the text that somebody is going to be reading directly off the slide, but we also have this image in the background, which makes it very difficult to visually track the words. And then the one on the bottom right here, what is a prioritization framework? I mean, that's a ton of text. And so there are 2 options if we have a slide like that. One, we read all of it, in which case our audience can just read along, which is why have a presentation in that case. Or 2, we're not going to read much of it, and we're just going to hit a couple highlights, in which case it's far easier for our reader to follow things, our audience to follow things, if we pare that down into bullet points, much like we talked about with the email and the cover letter. And these, by the way, I just Googled bad PowerPoint slides, and these came up. So, there you go. Now, in that investigation, I also came across this, which is an interesting comparison, right? Like if we look at the slide on the left, common mistakes in presentations, the one on the right, they're, for all intents and purposes, presenting the same information. But think about how much easier it is to track the one on the right. A lot easier just to follow along and see things pop out at you. Each one is 2 or 3 words. I think the longest there, 3 words. And the one on the left, there's a lot there. Again, we can fill that in with our dialogue or our spoken word. I think, for my taste, I'm not a fan of the specific contrast and the purple and the white. It's not because I dislike purple for any reason. It's just for some reason it doesn't stand out to me, but that may just be idiosyncratic. That might just be me. So from that, hopefully we can very simply go through kind of do's and don'ts, except for I'm going to do it the flip way. I'm going to do don'ts and do's because, as I said, I like to know what a bad version is before I know what a good version is. So don't use too many images, right? Don't use moving images. One quarter, I some students use moving GIFs, and it was like a cartoon that was looped and like 2-second loop. And it was really, really distracting because my eye kept gravitating towards that image. And as it gravitated towards that image, it also distracted me from what the person was saying. Don't use unreadable fonts, right? Times New Roman, similar, sans serif, something like that. Don't get too wild and crazy with fonts. Don't use too much text. Don't read directly from the slides, and don't use fancy transitions between slides. I know that some people like it. Obviously, you've been watching my presentations all quarter. I just simply do a regular slide-to-slide transition. I think it's easier, it's smoother. And then if I need to go back and forth for whatever reason, it doesn't become cumbersome. So things to do, I would use images to support the text. So if you're going to have an image, have a reason for that image. Use a neutral font, which we already talked about. Use bullet points, right? Rather than writing out full sentences, because you don't have to have full sentences on the slide because you're going to be expanding on that. Do have a script that expands on your presentation. Do consider using animating the text so that you can present things one item at a time. So what I mean by that, and this is in Google Slides at least, I can have a whole list of things, and as I present them, I can simply click and it will present each individual thing. That way, my reader, rather than looking, and if you noticed, the difference between this, where I give you all 6 at the same time, and this, makes it much easier for me to control and to keep things focused and keep things interesting. Okay, so how I generally approach presentations. So I kind of wanted to do a little kind of meta dive into this, and I mentioned earlier I'd go into my philosophy and approach. And one thing that I'd say is that I don't have to use these presentations. There's obviously no requirement. I began using PowerPoint presentations in in-person classes because it was simply faster to have the slides than to try and write everything on the board. And also it serves as a sort of lecture notes so that I know where I'm at and I can continue because I have slides that are cueing me, that are helping me focus on things. So I generally start with kind of brainstorming what I want to cover. For example, presentations. The next step that I do is I open a new Google slide deck and I will start piecing in slides. It works for me kind of like an outline that I can start putting in my slides, seeing how things work. I can move slides around, get them to the best order, and then I can revise those slides, both in terms of the wording and in terms of, maybe it actually makes sense for me to present this thing before this thing. And I've done that quite a bit too over the years, where I'll look at a presentation that maybe I haven't used for a while, and I'll realize I actually want to move these things around. So just to kind of give you the sort of behind the scenes sort of look, right? I use a speaker note. So once I've created all my slides and I've got all the content on the slides, I kind of know the order, I will actually go through and type out kind of that script in the speaker notes. So here is a screenshot from earlier in the quarter. I think this was the one about emails or job postings. No, it looks like job posting. So what you can see is on the left-hand side here, I have the slide view so I can see where I'm at in the presentation. Then I have the actual slide and then my text down here. Now, I don't necessarily follow that text word for word. It's simply a way for me to remember the main things I wanted to talk about. And additionally, in the process of writing the speaker notes, it helps me solidify things because then I'm not trying to think, oh, what was it that I wanted to say about this particular slide? Okay, so last thing. So giving a presentation, just some tips, things that I do and you can decide whether or not what I do is effective or works for you. But what I do is, once I've created a presentation, I've done my speaker notes, I review the slides that I've created. So once I've created the presentation, I'll go ahead, put on slideshow mode, and I'll just go through each of the slides. Then before I do a presentation or record a presentation, I'll go through my slides too, just to, refresh myself. I don't go into depth. It's not like a rehearsal. It's just, right, here's the order that I'm going to go in. And then the other things that I've sort of developed, especially I think mostly during COVID, as I was doing a lot of video lectures, is that I will kind of set things up so that I have an iPad here. It's just to my left where I have this presentation. And so I have the presentation in front of me, which is what you see, but I also have the presentation here on my left in this other format. So this is what I'm seeing, would be seeing on my other page almost exactly. I can see the slides, the order, the actual slide, and then the speaker notes. So what that allows is, and you might notice this in some of my videos, is that I'll glance over to the left and I'll be fussing around here. It's because I want to make sure I know where I'm headed next to create a nice smooth transition. And then, of course, although I'm not great at timing for video lectures, I'm getting better. I have my phone here, which I use just strictly as a stopwatch, just to make sure I'm hitting kind of in that right area. And then I use Panopto to record things. It's built into Canvas, and then I convert the videos to YouTube for various reasons. And you can use whatever software you like. It doesn't matter to me. And again, totally up to you whether or not you send me the PDF of your slides and then the script, or PDF with the speaker notes visible, or if you want to do the whole, record the whole presentation like I'm doing right now. I will say that doing the whole presentation is valuable. It give you that extra practice and kind of help solidify things. But there you go. Much longer than I anticipated. As always, it's a one time in my life that I go over almost every time. All right. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.